Hello, fellow Ravenloft explorers. This is Paradox 2767, and today, let's chat about Pitboss. Designed as a central antagonist for me and my friend's current D&D campaign, Pitboss is the all-new, homebrewed Dark Lord of an island of terror we're calling Dentonrog. Today, I wanted to get into the character's somewhat R-rated lore, then provide you with a few stat-blocky particulars at the end of the video, in case you feel like incorporating this Dark Lord of Dentonrog into your own campaign. We begin our tale in the gambling mecca of Favengorn, or Fortune City, where Pius Gauger was born a bastard to a beggar woman in the city's slums. Early on in his life, Pius discovered he had a knack for sleight of hand, and put that skill to the test as a cut purse of tourists, feeding and housing himself and his parent. For years he busied himself in this fashion, spending most of his time at work in the smaller bars and gambling houses of the city, and the rest of his time trying to woo the beautiful daughters of all the people passing through. One early morning, when he was a teenager, hubris brought Pius into the Pyramid, one of the massive casinos of Fortune City's main strip, ready to test his pickpocketing craft against the watchful gazes of innumerable guards. And for a brief moment, his test was a success, earning Pius a heavy purse from the best-dressed man on the casino floor. That is, successful until a guard caught him from behind and informed the large man of what had happened. As it turned out, that man was none other than the ruthless owner of the casino himself, who couldn't believe the coin purse he was seeing in the boy's swift grip. Instead of punishment, Pius was met with a guttural laugh, then an offer from the man to put his skilled hands to honest work. Fast forward a decade, and despite the unfortunate death of his mother, Pius's life was right on track. He'd worked his way up through the ranks, from the dealer of a single small card table to the floorman manager of several, then at last up to the position of pit boss to the entire pyramidal casino. For his sprouting size and stature, he'd gained the attention of anyone he passed in the pit. Lustful or jealous admiration from most, fear from any who would try to rob the casino as he once had. And this fear was well placed. Pickpockets were subject to the bent end of Pius's infamous dice stick, whipped and walloped in public as an example to other would-be crooks, on several occasions to death. Card counters and other such larger offenders were less lucky, perhaps. Little is known of what precisely would happen to those escorted by Pius into the casino's lower offices. Soon, his reputation grew to such an extent that the other casino owners of Fortune City grew envious, so that a deal was struck by which Pius would make paid appearances on their floors as well, silently spreading the message among the locals not to mess with whichever casinos he had been seen in. Smaller gambling houses in town caught on to this too, saving up to put Pius on their payrolls, more than making up for this expense in both their increased reputation and their newfound absence of theft. No one knew when he'd make another appearance, so that wherever Pius had been, local criminals rarely went. In the meantime, hardened though his exterior might have been, Pius still proved to have a weakness for women. Privately cavorting with countless entertainers, waitresses, and even casino guests, he at last landed on one in particular to court and eventually wed, a dancer he'd met as she passed through the pit on her way to a casino stage with her fellow performers. Her name was Delora, and within a year of their marriage she retired from the casino life, pregnant. Having relocated with her to a more lavish part of town, and a larger home than he could afford with just his single pit boss salary, the pressures of house payments began to set in. Ironically then, Pius returned to his original profession, secretly skimming off of gambling profits, becoming the only thief left in the casinos he helped to manage. He wasn't foolish enough to think he could go on undetected in this manner forever, however, and indeed he couldn't. One evening, his shift in the pit of the pyramid was interrupted by a team of surly men. The casino's large owner was looming behind them, gutturally laughing again as he had on the first day he and Pius had met, shaking his head, wagging a finger to his longtime companion. Right there on the casino floor, Pius was then beaten with the men's swinging fists and his own dice stick, famously offering no resistance to the attack. Most of his teeth were removed by a quickly spinning roulette wheel in the process. Then his head was smashed to the front of the nearest slot machine. With enchanted cogs and coils sticking out from his lips, cheeks, and forehead, Pius was then dragged by the men into the casino's lower offices. There, in the same rusted, bleeding dungeons which had over the years seen Pius claim the lives of literal thousands, he himself was offered a choice by the casino's owner. Either Pius's life would be spared, or those of his wife and newborn son would. In a weeping moment of cowardice, Pius chose himself to live. This disgusted the owner, who nonetheless sent several men out to Pius's home to perform the task. Knowing it had been Pius's marriage to Delora that had reset the man on his course of theft, the casino owner then decided to remove women altogether from Pius's equation, making a eunuch and thus a perfect servant out of him. With a dull heirloom dagger, the owner himself removed Pius's ring finger, then went on to remove the manhood of his former friend. It quickly became apparent that Pius too would be joining his wife and child in death from his badly bleeding injuries. The casino owner showed little concern for this, however, rising to wash his hands of the matter. It was at that moment that a mist surrounded Pius, and the ruined man evaporated. When the guilt-stricken Pius awoke again, he did so reborn as Pitboss, Dark Lord of a whole new land. With an oversized version of his old dice stick and a dice-tipped cat-o'-nine-tails for weapons, plus a roulette wheel for a shield, a forever-bleeding pelvis, ring finger, and head, and a rusting slot machine for an irremovable helmet, Pitboss assumed his new yet familiar role as dreaded overseer of the city of Dentonrog. While the layout of the streets and casinos might have matched that of Fortune City, Pitboss would soon find that little other similarities existed. Instead of forests, Dentonrog was surrounded by the mists of Ravenloft. Instead of a river flowing through it, a bottomless chasm. Instead of a bustling city, a barren, rocky wasteland, its only standing buildings being those of the Strip and several other smaller gambling houses. Within those scattered casinos existed Dentonrog's only other inhabitants, gamblers, a host of ghoulish gamers still bleeding from whatever wounds or ailments had claimed their lives in Fortune City. Many of those lacerations, of course, Pius inflicted. These creatures came to live in constant fear of his new lurking form, meanwhile compulsively gambling for all eternity, adding and subtracting from their funds in increments, falsely believing that they might be able to buy their way out of Dentonrog someday. Pitboss, in fact, shares a similar belief even to this day. So long as he keeps literally pouring Dentonrog's gambling proceeds into the city's mysterious chasm, he trusts, there might at last come a day when he successfully repays his Sisyphean stolen debts to the casino owners of Fortune City, thereby buying both his release and his reunion with Delora and their son. After all, Pitboss never actually saw them murdered, and has yet to see their spirits roaming the gaming floors of Dentonrog. For this, he scans through all the different casino floors compulsively, crisscrossing on an endless route between buildings, a lone traveler over the rocky terrain of his dark city. With every next stop, he searches for that beautiful dancer again, then collects any funds he can from the casino's central offices, tortures a gambler or two to keep the rest of them fearfully gaming, then continues on his way. Inevitably, whenever another gambling establishment breaks ground in Fortune City, its twin form soon takes shape on the same street and spot in Dentonrog. Most recently, my friends and I began the Foxtrot Tavern and underground gambling house in a far corner of town, not knowing this otherworldly implication. To our horror and amazement, the very first night we fall asleep in the inn, we wake up in a darkly twisted version of our own establishment. We find gamblers bleeding on their dice and cards where ordinary tourists had been, and notice a large, lumbering form outside in the distance, coming to our new casino to collect his grim debt. Now, if all that terror delights you so, perhaps you too might want to try your dice at taking on the Dark Lord of Dentonrog. So, for the rest of the video, I wanted to go over a few stat block logistics. Looking at Pitboss, we start with the obvious fact that he's a large humanoid. He's also lawful evil for running such a tight ship, albeit one sailing through dashed hopes and blood for seawater. His armor class is 18, his hit points are 256, and his speed is 40 feet. Now those hit points do come with a special caveat, but we'll get to that in a bit. Pitboss's ability scores and modifiers can be seen here next, with a high strength and constitution for his physical prowess, and a high dexterity for his past in dealing cards. His intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, in the meantime, reflect his past as a peasant. His sleight of hand is +9, again from his time as a cut-person dealer, and his passive perception's at 14. For languages, he can understand Common, however, with the state of his head and face, he can no longer speak it. His challenge rating's at unlucky 13, offering 10,000 experience points in the event of his defeat. Now onto his defining trait, Triple Hearts, which calls back to that caveat I mentioned in regard to his hit points. Whenever Pitboss's HP is halved, he falls to a prone position until the start of his next turn. This means, because you keep cutting the value of his hit points in half, it becomes easier and easier to get him into that position. In other words, it takes 128 damage the first time, then 64, 32, 16, and so on. Now, while Pitboss is prone, as an action, players are able to pull down once on the arm of his slot machine head. To do this, roll 3d4s. If you get 3 1s, 2s, or 3s, that value times 100 painfully pours out of the tray beneath Pitboss's chin, up to 900 gold pieces. Better yet, if even more fortunately you roll 3 4s equaling 12, you've landed 3 hearts in a row. Pitboss is subjected to a brightly flashing hallucination of a reunion with his wife and kid, thereby putting him out of commission for several hours or even days. Could a kind of trophy be removed from his person at this time of vulnerability for taking back to Fortune City, proving to the casino owners there that you've seen the city's other side and have subsequently brought an end to the mysterious Favengorn plague of big-time gamblers disappearing in their sleep? Could his hallucinative state prove to be the only way back in the first place? What else might the implications be? After a while, Pitboss will awake to the horrors of Dettenrog again, all the more desperate to reunite with his family, and all the more vindictive because of it. This slot machine method is, in fact, the only way to subdue Pitboss at all, a Dark Lord that can't ever actually be completely vanquished. Even when his hit points are brought down to 1, players must keep gambling for triple hearts, no matter how long or short a time this takes, only for Pitboss to rise again at the start of each of his turns to inflict more damage. Now, let's move on to how he does that. His primary action is a multi-attack, allowing Pitboss to make 2 swings of his oversized dice stick and 1 of his cat-o'-9 tails. For both of these weapons, it's +6 to hit. His dice stick deals 4d8 plus 4 bludgeoning damage, and his 9-ended whip deals 9d6 plus 4 slashing damage, so you can see right there that he's a force to be reckoned with. For my party at this stage of the game, our best bet's to try and hide from or avoid him, all the while hopefully finding a viable way to get back to Fortune City as quick as we can. One way to keep Pitboss's attention off of you is to gamble until he leaves the area again, but this can get expensive. In Dettenrog, all bets cost 10 gold pieces and only ever pay off when you roll a natural 20 for 200 back. So you might want to think about avoiding the card tables and slot machines while you can. Unfortunately, in Dettenrog, this isn't always possible. Whenever you enter a new casino, you must perform a wisdom check. If you fail, the unholy allure of the casino prevails, and you're forced to place a bet. In fact, you have to keep making 10 gold piece bets until you succeed in a wisdom check beforehand. This cycle otherwise only ending when you've compulsively gambled away every last scrap of your funds, gear, and weapons. Even if you willingly begin gambling in a casino you've already been to, this wisdom check cycle starts up again, for the game has successfully entrapped your attention. Oh, and if you do gamble at all, whether on purpose or accident, flashing your funds in this fashion will attract the attention of other creatures in the casino. As soon as you walk away from a game, and if Pitboss isn't there to keep them in line, gamblers in the surrounding area will leave their tables and machines to attack. Said gamblers are essentially reflavors of zombies, sharing all their same stats. For an overgrown gambler, try the stats of a beholder zombie instead, or any other zombies you find in your monster's manual and other bestiaries. But of course with gamblers, there is an extra catch. Instead of engaging in combat, or even during combat, you're able to bribe them back to their gaming at a cost of 1 gold piece per quarter of their challenge rating. For instance, a typical gambler with a challenge rating of 1/4 would cost a single gold piece to leave you alone. However, if a given gambler takes its stats from a beholder zombie instead, for instance, its challenge rating of 5 is going to put you back 20 gold pieces. Whichever route you take, bribing or bashing, be sure to get it over with quick, or the attention-grabbing confrontation will draw more than just a couple desperate casino gamblers to your location. In Dettenrog, your debts and damage can add up quick. And there you have it, the lore and stats of the Dark Lord Pitboss, his city, and his unwilling minions. Of course, if you do think the horrors of Dettenrog might fit your campaign, I encourage you to alter the map and monster stat blocks as you see fit. Maybe your Dettenrog is a simple method of escape. Maybe it doesn't. Or maybe your group's got a little less gold than mine at the moment, and you need to bump down that compulsory 10 gold piece bet a bit, so the whole party doesn't end up leaving Dettenrog penniless and naked. On the flip side though, if the dice are unusually kind, you could leave town with a fortune. All that's up to you and your friends, and I do hope you all enjoy it. So whether you seek to lighten Pitboss's misery for a few hours by rolling triple hearts on his slot machine head, or you simply want to punish the wretch for all the pain he's inflicted, you're certainly welcome to pay Dettenrog a visit. Sympathetic to the Dark Lord or not, you can be sure he doesn't share the sentiment. Unmoved, he roams his pitiable land for a singular purpose. Woe to anyone willing to challenge this tortured existence. So, thanks for watching, and good luck with that.